Welcome to the Katie
and Kelsey
show. Welcome. Tonight we're eating chips. No, we're eating biscuits. We have a very, very special guest tonight to all of our fans out there. We have a new face over there or over there, depending on how this is recording. Don't know. This is Allison Moratis. Yay! Allison is going to explain a little bit about what she does, but you should know she is one of my best friends, and I've known her since college. We were roommates. Were we?
No.
Never lived together.
Call me.
Felt like we lived together. She is an expert on alcohol, liquor specifically. She works for Campari America. I know a lot of you have Aperol spritzes out there, which is also owns Wild Turkey and some other places, including Wild Turkey's high-end Russell's Reserve, which we're going to taste tonight. So Allison, welcome to our show.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm coming at you from Chicago.
So tell us a little bit about what you do before we dive into trying whiskeys and ryes.
Sure. So as you said, I work for Campari America. I am their brand ambassador here in Chicago, so I represent the whole portfolio. Campari is the parent company out of Milan, but we own a ton of major brands that I'm sure you're familiar with: Grand Marnier, Espolòn Tequila, Sky Vodka, Wild Turkey, and Russell's Reserve whiskeys. It's a huge portfolio. So I get to represent all those brands in Chicago, in bars and restaurants here.
So you go into bars and restaurants. What is like a daily Allison Campari day look like?
What's a daily day?
Let's say pre-COVID, and then
I know it shifted so much, sadly. But
I have a present from.
Oh, perfect! It's a mini Grand Marnier. I love it.
We sell them at the Harvard General Store.
And that's a good partner for some of the whiskey cocktails that we can talk about a little later too.
Very nice.
So pre-COVID, back in 2019, my days were super fluid. I don't have an office. I get to do any admin from home, and then mostly I'm just out and about every single night, eating and drinking and supporting Chicago restaurant scene. It's pretty much a dream job. But my goals tend to include getting cocktail placements on menus, educating bar staffs and buyers on the brands, and then planning events sort of trade facing. So as a thank you to bartenders, we do all sorts of trade engagement and parties and education, and that was my day to day. And obviously the landscape has shifted a lot with COVID, and bars and restaurants are really suffering. It's super hard to witness. Those are my best friends who own bars and work in bars, and it's very hard to see their struggle and the lack of support, from the government.
Zero support so far.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, I mean, it's crazy. You think about liquor and drinking, it's sort of a bulletproof industry. Typically, it's not normally affected, but because my job is so focused on bars and restaurants, obviously it's been dramatically impacted. But that being said, people are drinking still and in excess. And so all those sales are coming from liquor stores, much like the Harvard General Store. So instead of going out to have a cocktail, we're making them safely at home. And so,
hi, Bentley.
He's our local Wild Turkey 4-pod ambassador. A lot of the sales for Campari have shifted, and that means the company's still doing really well, but it's hard to see that all coming from grocery stores, liquor stores, corner stores, as opposed to like where my heart is with my friends in the bars and restaurant industry. So it's, a two-sided coin. It's hard. Obviously, I'm grateful to still have my job. I've held it straight through the year, and Campari's been really flexible. We're still trying to support where we can, and I know everyone's trying to pivot. Word of the year.
Word of the year. So that's going to be like the Time word of the year,
I know. I kind of like makes my skin crawl, but
that or like pod.
Mm-hmm. Or what?
Pod.
She's saying it a little bit like pod for some reason, like P-A-W-D. But what
are you saying though?
P-O-D. Pod.
Oh, pod. Pod. I guess, yeah.
It's an It's not an
pod.
You're saying it like you're from the South.
I have a weird dialect sometimes, and as someone who studied I like literally studied this.
Yeah.
I feel like
Pod. Yeah, pod.
started.
Pretty
Pod.
excited.
Pod. Okay, I got it. Thank you for that translation.
You're welcome. I can write it out for you, but
Yeah.
okay, anyway. Should we
So
try?
anyway.
I'm glad. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah,
This
thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm really excited. I like whiskey is a scary thing for me. I'm like, what is it supposed to taste like? And it's very sophisticated to me. And so it's nice.
I'm excited.
I mean, I've worked in this industry for 10 years now, but the fun part is, I mean, it's truly just tasting until you discover what you like and peeling back kind of the fear and all the stigmas that come with whiskey, and just knowing, I mean, there's so many brands on the market. So there's going to be something that you like, for sure.
All right. I think we're going to start with the Russell's rye. So could you tell us a little bit about,
what is the difference between whiskey, bourbon, rye?
Yep.
Then we go abroad.
Yep. So, generally speaking, yes, we'll just simplify it for everyone. Whiskey is the umbrella term. So whiskey, all of these are whiskeys. Okay. Yep. And then under that, we have different styles and categories. So we have bourbon, we have rye, we have Irish whiskey, we have Japanese whiskey, we have Scotch whiskey.
I like Japanese whiskey.
And so those are all different types of whiskeys, and they all have different laws and requirements that they need to be followed. So with bourbon, we're tasting rye, so we can start with rye. But rye by law must be
delicious.
51% rye.
Okay,
so
and that's
rye grain must be the majority grain. Yep. And so when we're talking about this, I like to think of it in terms of like bread. So rye tends to be a spicier grain, just like rye bread. You're going to get more flavor, more spice, more character. That's a 90 proof rye whiskey, Russell's Reserve. I mean, honestly, up until recently, rye was not a popular whiskey. Bourbon was, exactly what people were drinking. So rye, I mean, we used to distill it twice a year, just once in the spring, once in the fall. And now we have to spend 50% of the time making it. And that's really because of bartenders. And they brought back the popularity of rye whiskey with all of those classic cocktails, those pre-prohibition style cocktails.
So those like the old fashioned
Manhattan, yep, Sazerac, all those classic, simple stirred whiskey cocktails. And they used to call for rye. And so that kind of came back into popularity. But rye by law must have at least 51% rye. So it means it's majority rye. And from there you could have 70 or 80% rye, but you tend to use other grains, malted barley, wheat, corn, etc.
Oh, I really like this. Okay, so as people who don't drink a lot of liquor, what are you tasting? What are we tasting? I hear the spiciness.
I get a lot of honey.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. And I always say, I mean, it's so subjective. So it's not like you're tasting anything incorrectly. And there shouldn't be any fear about what you're tasting, because whatever it is, it's valid. So if you get honey, that's awesome. Yeah. If there's notes of spice or dried fruit or apple or honey or cherry.
It tastes very like fall.
Yeah.
Like I feel like
yeah.
Also like the 90 proof makes you feel warm.
Totally. It's warming you.
Warm. That's what I'm experiencing too.
Yeah.
We've started to kind of get into whiskey time and tasting it. It just is it warms you right away.
And
totally.
Smells delish.
That whiskey hug. And where, goes down the throat, down into your chest, warms you up.
Yeah, it really does. And then it's like so warm.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa.
Totally.
So rye cocktails would be sort of these,
I mean, honestly, any of those classics. Yeah. But rye and bourbon, I mean, now it's not strict what you can use. So it's all about, if you want that stirred classic kind of more boozy cocktail, you can do any of those. Manhattan, old fashioned, Sazerac. I love the Boulevardier, which is equal parts rye whiskey or bourbon if you like it a little bit sweeter, but rye, Campari, and sweet vermouth, which is a great classic cocktail.
We have a lot of sweet vermouth in the store too.
Yep, I love vermouth. That's a great ingredient to mix with whiskey. It rounds it out, gives it a little bit more of those spice and kind of dried fruit notes, maybe a little bit more nuttiness. And then, you can add any sort of sugar you want to it, simple syrup or brown sugar syrup.
So the Russell's, it smells, now I'm smelling like maple syrup. Take a sniff.
I mean, so this is my heart. I love the
years
Russell's
old?
family.
Can you explain a little bit about the years?
Yes. So if there's an age statement on the bottle, that means every drop of liquid within the bottle has to be at least that age statement. So often it'll
The
be
barrel, that long.
older. Right. So this is at least 6 years old. So every rye drop in there is at least 6 years old. It's totally possible that there's some 7 and 8-year-old rye in there too, but it has to be at least that old. So if you see a bottle that says 10-year-old, then it has to be at least 10 or 12 or 18 or whatever. But if it doesn't have an age statement, that means it's often a blend of a lot of different ages, and it might have some young whiskey in it, and they might not want to have to say that age statement. So if you have a 2, an 8, and a 10, you would have to say it's 2-year-old whiskey, even though there's older whiskey in it.
So is there a preference of year? Like, are like really intense whiskey lovers, are they like, oh, I only do a 12-year, or is it? Yeah.
And I think it's an unfortunate like misconception that age means something. I mean, it came from the days when you would drink scotch. And I mean, there you're seeing 12, 18, 21, super old whiskey. And that's because they've been doing it for so long, they have so much more product. Whereas bourbon and rye are newer categories, and you have to let it age for decades. I mean, it takes a long time. So bourbon and rye as a category, I tend to think that they drop off at a certain point. So if you were drinking like a 30-year-old bourbon, I don't think that would be desirable. But it's a very male-centric industry, and so the connotation is the older, the more expensive, the better. And I don't think that's necessarily true. So
I mean, it makes so much sense if it's like American, right? So if like bourbons are American and like scotch is from Scotland, that's been around a lot longer.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay. I like this. Should we move on to the old elk?
Yeah.
I want to come back. I think I really, okay. Here's another question.
I really like this.
I really like it. It's growing on me as I drink it too. We're going to do Old Elk. It's a blended straight bourbon whiskey that we carry in the store. Now this doesn't have a year on it.
Right.
So this is probably more of a mix of a bunch of different kinds of whiskeys.
Yes. So again, whiskey being the umbrella term, but it's bourbon. So by law, as we were talking about with rye, it has to be at least 51% rye. So any guess what bourbon has to be?
49%.
Nope, you were right.
51.
51%.
I should have got my
bourbon.
Corn. So we're talking about the majority grain. So rye is rye grain and bourbon is corn.
Huh.
So
really
bourbon by law has to be at least 51% corn, and both bourbon and rye have to be made in America. So they have to be distilled in the United States. They both have to be aged in brand new charred American oak barrels. So every time you're aging bourbon or rye, it has to go into a brand new barrel. So that's why it's expensive. It's time consuming. And there's a lot of laws in terms of distillation proof, barreling proof, and bottling proof, but that's a little bit more nerdy. But the other main fact is you can't add any flavor or color or additives to it. So bourbon and rye must be exactly what they made.
Well, and they're gorgeous. I mean, look at the colors.
Yeah. And that's all from that barrel. So it's the booze extracting the color of the wood.
Okay, so where do we get this? Oh, Bentley. Bentley, okay, here's.
So this is Old Elk bourbon.
It's smoother, but
it is different. It's good. It is always good to know.
I taste more
things
corn.
Are different.
I think I like. Okay, let me keep sipping before I make a judgment. No binaries. I like them both. I think I like the rye a little better.
This is smoother. I sort of like this a little bit better because I think that the thing is about whiskey, at least, is I need to be able to sip it, because if not, it like totally overwhelms me. And
this feels rounder, like the sweetness. I'm trying to taste that.
So again, corn grain versus rye grain. So corn is just going to be a sweeter grain in general.
And it says that there's like hints and flavor of rye. It says it's. Oh, hi, Bentley.
He was just wanting some whiskey.
Are you the wild turkey over there?
You got a little wild turkey bandana.
So, okay. This says that it is it says it uses 4 times more malted barley than conventional recipes.
Yep. So this is the Old Elk we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So I found out that's actually the the owner of the distillery is the founder of Otterbox, funny enough.
Oh.
But essentially, this is an important distinction. So Russell's Reserve, both our bourbon and our rye, all of our products made at the Wild Turkey Distillery, we make ourselves. So that means we get the grain, we ferment, we mash, we distill, and we bottle all at the distillery. And that's an important distinction because there are a lot of distilleries that are purchasing product. So it's kind of been a long open secret that a lot of those craft distilleries are buying and bottling whiskey from other major corporations. And the main one is called MGP, Midwest Grain Production. It's out of Indiana. And that's because the distilleries often, the whiskey that they're aging, it's still in barrels. And the company needs something to hold them over while the, whiskey continues to mature. So that being said, Old Elk is a sourced whiskey. So that means they're not making it. Even though somewhere on the bottle it says it's from Colorado, that's probably where the distillery is, but they're actually sourcing the whiskey out of Indiana. They're blending it. They might be doing something else to it, like aging it. There's a lot of different things that can happen.
Aged 5 years.
I just saw that too.
Aged 5 years, great. And the one thing with Old Elk, so again, it has to be majority corn, but they have a very high malted barley content. So you were asking about, like, are there any straight 100% corn whiskeys? And typically not, because you need different grains to make it easier to distill. It just comes down to like ease of production. So you're going to have a little bit of barley typically just to mix it up. But again, you could have rye, you could have barley, you can have wheat, and it comes down to what sort of flavor you want. These are the recipes of the whiskey.
Thanks for answering our questions.
Oh yeah, no.
I didn't know how many questions I had about whiskey. It's really good. I'm not, so I don't normally drink whiskey neat, like ever. Yeah. So it's kind of fun to be like sipping neat whiskey. Ooh. I always thought you're supposed to be doing that for like scotch and like, I don't know, like I don't think of sipping whiskeys, I guess. Is that, so my question was sort of, are these good for a cocktail? Like, it seems like, especially the Old Elk is more of like a cocktail thing, and maybe the Russell, I don't know, when I think of neat drinks, I think of scotch, and maybe that's a weird old timey.
Yeah, I think it's a little antiquated because it used to be that there were 4 bourbons and ryes on the market, and now there's hundreds. So you can have anything that suits your palate. And I definitely agree. I mean, in particular for you guys too, you're only selling the most premium brands. Those are totally meant to be drank on their own. Maybe a couple drops of water, maybe an ice cube. But yeah, you're not drinking bottom shelf spirits where you want to mix it like in a cocktail. Yeah. All of these would be great in a cocktail. I always say it's like the better ingredients, the better the outcome. But they're all stand out whiskeys, so they can hold their own.
So we also have, we're not going to taste it because we don't want to waste it on us.
Yeah, this is new. Appleton, along with the Russells.
Oh yeah, the Eagle Rare.
Eagle Rare.
Mm-hmm. So they do actually distill their own product. This is also a product of Kentucky, just like Russell's bourbon and rye are. It's a 10-year-old straight bourbon. So again, it has that age statement. It's aged at least 10 years. It's possible that there's 11 or 12-year-old whiskey in there. Wow. I believe it's 90 proof. And again, it has to be at least 51% corn. It tends to be corn and rye and barley. And from my research anyway, they're known as a low rye bourbon. So that means they probably have a really good amount of corn, probably upwards of 70, 80% corn, and then just a little bit of barley and rye to mix it up. So again, that's going to be sweeter overall.
That's going to be our most sweet one in the store.
I think so.
You want to taste it so bad.
I do really want to taste it. Okay.
Yeah.
Cheers.
We're like looking at you like,
sorry, you don't have any.
Cheers.
No, it's so fun because now you know. So we have bourbon and rye, both American.
So much sweeter.
Essential spirits.
That is really nice. Now that's the kind of honey, like.
Yep.
That's sweeter.
And that might be more of a gateway whiskey for someone who's kind of just coming into the category.
Yeah.
If they normally are drinking.
It's not as spicy in the throat as the other ones. So it still does the warming thing, but the sweeter,
You even smell it. I mean, you can probably smell it better in your glass, but the your little dram. I like them all. I feel like we have a really good bourbon.
You need them all, right? They all serve a different purpose.
They're
and
really
a different client.
Well, do you see that? So there's 2 questions kind of. Is it very much that time of year can influence the sales and and all of this kind of thing. And on the other hand, are there a lot of like whiskey year-round drinkers, like year-round?
I think in terms of bars and restaurants, I tend to see an influx in whiskey cocktails during the fall and the winter. It makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want a hot toddy or a cider with whiskey in it, or something a little bit richer, more spicy. So I think we tend to associate those flavors with fall and winter. But that being said, I mean, there's huge whiskey nerds and aficionados that go year round. I mean, for me personally, I don't really think of it as seasonal. Because there are shaken whiskey cocktails that can be super citrus forward and refreshing and easy to
Never had a
drink.
shaken whiskey cocktail.
Oh yeah.
Tell me about it.
I mean, there's whiskey sour. That's the most classic, but citrus, sugar, whiskey. So it could be anything, any mix.
That sounds like an old fashioned.
Lemon or lime as the citrus element. You could use simple syrup, or again, like maple syrup, or any sort of sweet based. And then you can shake it up and you get that really frothy, delicious kind of citrus cocktail, which is a good balance. Sometimes you want that rich, boozy stirred cocktail. Sometimes you just want something light and easy and refreshing.
I like a little bit of an egg white situation.
Yep. And that's kind of that classic sour. So you do lemon juice, bourbon, simple syrup, and an egg white. And so you're
Can you do that in the home?
Yeah, you can.
As you're talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, wow. Like, one day I'll get back into the bars and I'll get to try.
No, we'll do it ourselves.
I think we can have a little.
We can do it.
Allison, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure.
Yeah.
And we love that you love the Harbor General Store, even from so far away.
I love you guys. I love your post. It's so much just like joy and small town positivity and energy and community, and I love it so much, and I wish I could be there in person.
Me too. I'll show you. One day you're gonna come here. Here we are.
I love it.
Yes, don't forget about the grandma.
Look at us, badass ladies drinking whiskey.
Cheers. I know.
Come and get your own in the package store.
Cheers.
Audience.
Cheers.
Cheers.